Up next, we're going to have a audiovisual presentation from both coasts. Joining us from aboard the USS Midway is John Burns, who served in Vietnam as an officer with the Brownwater Navy operations in the Mekong Delta. He later went on to become the archivist of the state of California and is also presently the director of our Midway Institute for Teachers. Joining him as well from North Carolina is James E. Giles, who also served on LSTs in the Mekong region, I believe a little bit earlier than John did. One benefit that we will enjoy today is the fact that Mr. Giles was also a photography fanatic, and he took all kinds of unique pictures of the operations that were going on around him, thus providing invaluable photographic coverage of a little-known period of the Vietnam War. He was also a naval officer who went on to work in the next 30 years in Washington, D.C. as a defense analyst, primarily dealing with logistics management and other studies regarding Cold War issues, including reserve component roles and readiness. So with that, I'd like to open the floor now to Mr. Burns and Mr. Giles.
Thank you very much, Carl, and welcome everyone. Do I have a mic? Okay. Try that again. Thank you very much, Carl, and I'd like to welcome everyone to the session. LSTs on the Mekong, an unseen photographic record. I'm John Burns. With me is my longtime dear friend and colleague, Jim Giles. Both of us served as LST officers on the Mekong Delta. We each got there in our own unique way, but we first met in 1967 in the Officers Club in our amphibious warfare training in Little Creek, Virginia. We went to damage control school together. We went to NBC warfare school together. We then served in the Pacific at the same time. Actually, I was the first one aboard an LST. Jim to follow shortly thereafter, and finished out our service in Vietnam in both cases on LSTs. It was a unique experience that most people are unfamiliar with. Ships that many were mothballed, many were put out of service at the end of World War II, but they came back to do a job in Vietnam that has been little reported, but extraordinary. So that's what we're going to be talking about here today. And yeah, Jim, you want to introduce yourself a little bit, make sure our audio is okay here?
Okay, he's done. You should click that mute button.
How's that? Better?
Yep.
Got it?
You're good.
All right. So as John and I met at Little Creek in 1967 completely by chance. We happened to walk through a door at the O Club together. If either one of us had been a couple seconds earlier or later, we would probably not be friends today. But we've been good friends and spent a lot of time together over the years. So I'm retired now and live in Clayton, North Carolina, and spend my time doing the things I like to do: photography, playing with my sports car, and doing a little bit of writing on this or that. Back to you, John.
Okay. So we are going to proceed to look at a visual record of LSTs in Vietnam with a particular emphasis on the Mekong Delta. We're going to go back and forth a little bit. We're going to give you some technical detail. We're going to tell some stories. And we're going to give you a look-see at a world that no longer exists and that it was captured rather rarely. You're the first to see these photographs of Jim Giles, and I hope you enjoy them. LSTs are truly a unique ship. They were built for the specific purpose of executing amphibious landings during World War II. They quickly assumed the sobriquet large, slow target because they were sizable, about the same size as a World War II destroyer. They were targets because they carried valuable stuff, and they were very slow because of the shape of the ship, which Jim is going to talk about in a second here. The ability to exceed 10 knots was a difficult proposition. And so it's the primary design feature of these ships was its ability to hit the beach. Now, there were lots of landing craft that can do this. This is a landing ship, a fully commissioned vessel that is very sizable. Nothing this big had ever been constructed to do this before. These were purpose-made for World War II, and they initially were purpose-made to get armor onto the beach to contest the strong armored forces of our enemy. But the main thing that they could do is put stuff on the beach, supply the troops. That was their primary mission. Whatever they were carrying, it was always to supply the troops with whatever they needed, deliver troops to the shore, sometimes take wounded away, sometimes take prisoners away. As you'll see, these ships took on a multiplicity of missions. They would go anywhere they could get to a beach, they could land. There were tidal considerations, beach gradient considerations, and so forth. But fundamentally, they were extremely versatile because of a unique ballasting system that they employed. The conditions didn't bother them. They were the horrible riding ships of all time. They just tortured the crew, bringing them across the Atlantic and getting to the beach. But they operated under any conditions and in a multiplicity of configurations. The barracks that were needed in the Mekong Delta were provided by a variation of an LST. They were converted to repair ships and many other things. Jim, you want to tell us a little more about the technical aspects of these ships?
Sure. As John mentioned, they're about the size of a World War II Fletcher-class destroyer, so they were not small ships. In fact, when my partner Cynthia saw one for the first time in Alexandria, Virginia, the 325, when it came back from Greece, and I told her all about them, she said, I had no idea they were so big. Anyway, they were 328 foot long and 50 foot wide. They had two load conditions that are important to keep in mind. One is light with no cargo, and that was about 1,625 tons. Full load, they were almost 2.5 times as massive in that they had a full load of over 4,080 tons. The unique characteristic, John said, about being able to beach was that the draft forward was less than the draft less than the draft aft. And in most ships, the keel and the water line are parallel to each other. But in LST, they sit, there's more draft aft. In fact, in light load, it's only 2 foot forward and aft 7'6". And full load, it's 8'2" forward and 14'1" aft. But that allowed them to beach themselves on a beach with a 1 in 50 gradient. They had twin screws and twin rudders. They were underpowered with two GM 900 horsepower, 2-cycle diesels. And these were basically diesel electric railroad locomotive engines that they mass produced and made available for all kinds of installations, and particularly the LSTs. They had three generators that were also General Motors. They were 671s, and you may have ridden in any number of on harbor cruise boats and stuff that had a gray marine 671 diesel in it. John mentioned they could go 10 knots. You'll see some places where it says they could go 12. It just simply wasn't true. In a full load condition, the great wetted surface of the ship slowed it down. And the worst thing, of course, is every time you hit a wave, you almost felt like it stopped. And in fact, you could the ship was flexible enough so you could see that wave sort of rolling down the length of the hull. So given set and drift and wave and wind, you were lucky to eight to nine, maybe 10 on a good day. One of the things that's not a technical characteristic, but a salient feature of these ships is that there were 1,150 built during World War II. Keep in mind that there were, of those ships, that's 4 times the size of the current Navy. And so the advantage was that there were lots of them for which they could experiment and try different things with, and I'll cover that a little later. But they were basically a worldwide ocean-going vessel that could deliver its cargo to any suitable beach. There was no harbor structure required. There was no pier structure. All you need to do is run the ship directly up on the beach, open the bow doors, drop the ramp, and disgorge your cargo. The cargo on the main deck on the later LSTs could go down a ramp and out the ramp through the bow doors onto the beach. If the water was not suitable, the depth was not suitable for beaching, these ships also carried causeway pontoons alongside, which could be dropped into the water, assembled, and provide a causeway to the beach. So they were very flexible. And back to you, John.
So the one of the how's that? Trying to advance, Trevor. Not able to move on here. Right now, yeah, there we go. Okay, one of the things about these ships was they were designed primarily to help other people. They didn't have a lot of time for self-repair. You can see the material condition of this particular LST converted to an ARL as a little shaky, because they were always helping other people out. They were delivering a lot of stuff, a lot of cargo, but they also provided services to an enormous number of other vessels. And you're all familiar with swift boats and PBRs and things like that, but there were all kinds of other crafts that needed help and needed assistance. These are ASPBs, salt boats, Zippo boats. Even encountered some old South Vietnamese craft, like a French gunboat that had been pressed into service for the Vietnamese. You know, Jim has a nice analogy actually about a movie that he thought of might shed some light on by analogy, the nature of what we encountered there.
Right. If you remember in the earlier Star Wars movie, they go to the flight deck and they're ready to take on the Death Star or whatever. And you are just assaulted with this hodgepodge of different kinds of weapons and all different kinds of crew members and tools and equipment. And it's all kinds of very gritty. That's what it sort of felt like over there. It wasn't the spit and polish that you might get under, say, a carrier that's sailing in the Mediterranean or something. So it was completely different. But the overall condition of the ships in country, whether they were the LSTs or there were other types of Navy ships there, the condition was appalling. And when we get to the end of this, I'll go over that in a little more detail. But we were at the end of a logistics pipeline that's stretched almost, sort of halfway around the globe. And there's a hierarchy that we were part of. First of all, for the Navy, combatant forces get support over support ships. The blue water takes precedent over the brown water. And in country, we worked for the Army. The Army ran the war, from my point of view, in Vietnam. And so we were three layers down in every sort of circumstance. We were not combat, we were not blue water, and we were not Army. And so it was very difficult to come by anything, including things like lube oil, which we burnt in the engines considerably. Give you an idea of one terrible circumstance. where the condition was so bad. On the Page County, they started to get underway, and they had not had time to clean out their air boxes on the engines. And fuel oil and fuel had accumulated in the air boxes. A little bit of hot carbon ignited that mixture in the air boxes. The ensuing fire and explosion burnt the engine room crew badly, and they all had to be evacuated to the Army Burn Center in San Antonio, Texas. I just happened to be in Vung Tau on my way from the Stone County back to my ship, the 902, which was up in Da Nang. I was in Vung Tau, and this happened, and the squadron commander, Commander Cross, Land Ship Run 2, came over to me and said, I want you to go aboard the Page County and help her get underway. Wow, what a job. It was something else at the time, dealing with a scared crew. Anyway, the condition was appalling. John?
There's not much glamour associated with being on these ships. These are really working vessels, and I always was fascinated when people ask me, "Do you ever see a USO show?" I guarantee you, there were no USO shows being held aboard LSTs. What we did have was the opportunity to see civilian society up very close at hand. The war for the Navy in the Delta was fought in the middle of an enormous civilian population, all trying to live their lives as they had done for centuries, but under truly extraordinary circumstances. And that made the pressure on Navy operations that much more. Now, of course, the Army and the Marines encountered that on the ground in other parts of Vietnam. But for most sailors, they were out on the blue water. They were on a carrier or a destroyer. They had little or no contact ever with the Vietnamese civilian community. That was not true for LSTs. We were surrounded by civilians most of the time. They were at very close quarters. There was little opportunity sometimes to space yourself from them. And of course, within that, there's a veneer of hostility too, that not that everybody was unfriendly. In fact, little kids and so forth sometimes would be very friendly. We did a lot of things to help out the local communities because they were in the middle of their society. We're in the middle of their life, and they're surrounded by us. I mean, not just LSTs and the small boats, big ships were coming up and down the Delta close to the ocean. We've got like a big repair ship that's helping out some of the smaller ships. But you also have these barriers at various times on the river. It's just a totally challenging and extremely unfamiliar environment for our personnel, and one that was it made it complicated to operate in the Delta. We didn't understand the culture. None of us had any cultural training before we went to Vietnam. We were thrust into this, and so there were awkward moments where we're trying to figure out what's going on the Vietnamese side, and they're of course trying to figure out at the same time what we're doing. We're all sharing the river, big ships, small ships, all kinds of ships. We're all in this together, and it was at the same time we're also in a war that's just a click away, and that could intrude on the civilian space and on the military space at any time. I know Jim had a particular encounter when he went on a swift boat patrol that I think illustrates some of this. Jim?
Right. When I think back on it, it seemed at times we were on some sort of macabre theme park ride, in that we're moving along the river, we go around a bend, and some scene close ashore would unfold, and it would be something that they were not aware of us, but we could see what was going on. For example, we came around one bend, and there was a village, and there were people in the village shooting out towards people running towards the village. and I couldn't sort out what was going on because within a minute or so, we were around the bend and on our way the other way. In another case, I passed by a rice farmer on the port side, tending his rice paddy. And I could have yelled to him if I wanted to, but off in the distance, not too far away, A6 came screaming out of the sky, dropped some ordnance on some target. You could see the flash. You felt the blast, the shockwave aboard the ship, but the farmer never flinched. And I always wondered, was he expecting that to happen, or was it just so much part of his everyday life that what was important that he go about his rice farming? John mentioned I did go out on a swift boat patrol. At the club one night, I met a young ensign, Ensign Green, who was a swift boat captain. And I said, geez, I'd like to look at those. Sometime he said, hey, if you're there at 8 o'clock tomorrow, you can go out on patrol with us. And so for 2 days, I did go out on patrol with him, and we did all kinds of things. We picked up a chew hoy. We visited the village to give them a radio so they could stay in contact with our forces, although it wasn't clear who those people would be at night, whether they'd be on our side or not. We attacked some Viet Cong, and I couldn't really tell whether they ever shot back because there was so much noise of everything going on. But one of the things I do remember is that we were out amongst some junks, and one of the junks looked suspicious to Ensign Green, so he ordered them to stop, and they wouldn't. So we took out his M40 grenade launcher and put a round across their bow, and they stopped. And so we pulled it in right alongside, and some of our crew went down into the junk and tossed everything, and looking around to find illicit cargo. We didn't find any, but it's burned in my mind the way those people looked up at me in the junk. It just was hatred, and that was my first encounter close up with the Vietnamese, and I could see that they did not want us there. And that thought has been in my mind ever since. John?
Yeah, this is, I say, the most challenging environment to be in. And we worked with these small boat sailors. Sometimes we went out on patrols, like Jim mentioned, and we're learning all the time how to operate in this environment while we're also doing just an incredible amount of pure work. The LSTs were called workhorses of the Delta, I think in the Stars and Stripes article. They were also called battleships of the Delta at one point. We'll see a reason for that here in a little bit. But there was just an immense amount of material constantly on the move. Again, in the midst of the civilian community, in the midst of the war. If it existed, an LST carried it at some point. Everything from boots to bullets to Budweiser. Maybe more Budweiser than either of the others. You know, brought ashore, brought to other ships, brought to Army units, brought to Navy units, sometimes brought to civilian communities, not the Budweiser. And whoever needed it. There were no missions that the LST had that weren't accomplished in some fashion or another. One of them being even receiving aircraft. LSTs were in one way the smallest aircraft carriers. Could put 5 of them inside the hull of this giant USS Midway. But as helicopter landing pads, they served quite adequately. Jim, you had some comments on that too, I think.
Yes, the LSTs, to give you an idea, I already went over the light load and heavy load. It was roughly 1,600 tons versus 4,000 tons. That's a cargo to platform ratio of 2.5. There are no aircraft that can do something like that, particularly not helicopters or something. Even a supply ship can't do that. So basically, they were efficient cargo carriers. They could carry whatever out of the weather in the tank deck, which was 230 foot long and 30 foot wide and 12 foot high. And so that's for a total of almost 83,000 cubic feet you could store stuff out of the weather. You also could put whatever would fit on the main deck that you could drive up the bow ramp and then up a ramp onto the main deck and turn it around and park it and then lash it down. They could also carry stuff lashed to the sides like pontoons and then deploy those pontoons to make up a causeway. At various times, LSTs, because there were so many of them, they were not Fabergé eggs and allowed people to experiment with them and do different things. For example, they were used as hospital ships. And some were just used as a fleet post office facility to handle all the mail, say, in the fleet during a particular time. One of the more interesting things was that they were used as an actual aircraft carrier in that they could launch and retrieve aircraft. In fact, the aircraft that they would carry, I think they carried 5 L4, which is the like a Piper Cub, that were used as observation aircraft before an area would be secured. So the LST could bring in these light aircraft, launch them, and then if the aircraft could land because the place had been captured, fine. If not, they could come back and be captured by the LST. We mentioned the APBs, the barrack ships. They were purpose built as barrack ships, but they had the bow doors and stuff that was never included. And of course, the command and control was moved forward, but they had spaces on them for staff, command staff, and the interior was, and the topside deck housing was used to house people. And they also had a helipad so that they could do medical evacuations and other things. They also were more heavily armed with 3-inch guns and more 40-millimeter guns and other smaller caliber ones. The ARLs, the small boat repair ships, were in fact converted LSTs, and they had heavy lift booms so that they could pick up any of the landing craft, put it on deck, work on it, fix it, put it back in the water. In Vietnam, we did sort of 3 basic things. We picked up, in this case here, we're going to go alongside the White Plains, AFS-4, and pick up a load of cargo. We'll take it back up to the Mobile Riverine Force. And that was called an INREP, as opposed to an UNREP at sea. We also would take units in country from, say, Dong Tam up to Cam Ranh Bay. And early on, when the LSTs were over there, they did a lot of runs out of theater. They'd go up to Okinawa or go back to Guam or the Philippines and pick up a load of cargo and bring it back. Basically, we could take people. We used to take Army personnel from one place to another. Lots of ammo. You saw that. The way it was put on board was sometimes horrifying to a guy who had been on an ammo ship. But anyway, we carried fuel. We deliver fuel directly to the ships in the MRF. Lots of parts, industrial supplies, oxygen, acetylene, and so forth. We delivered frozen products and chilled products. We had reefers on the deck to do that. And John mentioned the beer. In one case, we pulled up to a place, just load some pallets of beer for the Army, and within minutes, there were little kiosks on the beach selling it. So back to you, John.
One of the characteristics that most people don't think of when talking about even the multiple missions of LSTs is we were in the center of, as LSTs, the most significant joint operation held in possibly since the Civil War. This whole River War was the first time we'd done something like this since the Civil War, working with the Army to prosecute the war in the Delta. And so a great deal of what we did in certain locations in the Delta was working with the 9th Infantry Division, especially as part of the Mobile Riverine Force. Some Army equipment was even designed specifically to fit just barely, as you can see, into the bow doors of an LST. If the Army needed it, we tried to bring it. And so we just transported, unloaded, moved an immense number of vehicles, sometimes personnel, lots of supplies, whatever they were able to have. It's just hot, sweaty, 7 days a week work. No time for R&R. People doing port and starboard watches, just exhausted. And, note the uniform variation that jungle boots and khakis for the officers was not uncommon. We often wore green uniforms or variations of Army uniforms, or sometimes hardly any uniforms at all, basically because it was so hot and so difficult to work in that environment. So when you got a chance for a break, it was rare. Below decks was hot also, no air conditioning in most compartments, and a welcome break was almost like, in a sense, a little slice of a moment of liberty to give yourself a little mental break against the workload that you consistently face, because within that workload, we're in the midst of a war, and I want to turn to the war part. LSTs were not immune from being in the war themselves. While their purpose was supply and transport and support for ships, they were frequently attacked. They were targets for the enemy. They were built strong and hard to sink. Nonetheless, the Viet Cong kept trying to do that. And so we're right in the middle of the war most of the time. This was a dredge sunk the night before, the remains of a French warship sunk sometime before. We're in the middle of this on a constant basis. And so despite all the other work, we also had to be very well prepared and trained up to defend our ships, defend ourselves, and sometimes even to take offensive action. And it was an all hands party, because everyone had to know, when you only have a few people on a ship, everybody has to know how to do everybody else's job, and including Mr. Giles here, getting ready to load a 40 millimeter. So we're going to actually talk a little bit about some of the sentry duty that was characteristic of the war, and another event that has never really been seen before. Trevor's going to manipulate this a little bit. What I want to talk about is that when LST stopped, we had to be very vigilant all the way along the rivers. When we stopped and anchored, that was a particular time when they were vulnerable to underwater attack by swimmers. And so sentry duty was a predominant feature of LST life. And that meant that we had people on deck with rifles, shooting up stuff that got close to the ship, throwing grenades overboard to take out swimmers that might have been underneath, sending out picket boats. There's a rare recording of a little clip of somebody on sentry duty here that I'm going to play.
Bunch of trigger happy guys today.
You want a grenade, sir?
Yeah.
Got a whole case up there now. You bring the other case up?
No.
Oh, there's a whole case up here, and there's a case behind up.
Hey, watch out for that bird!
You got 40 grenades now, sir.
Okay.
The 20 up here and 20 in the wheelhouse. Want some talcum?
Yeah.
It gives you an actual taste of the interchange on deck as sentry were going about their business. In this particular event, the USS Kemper County, LST 854, encountered an attack on a cargo ship, the SS Paloma, on the Saigon River in March of 1966. like all sailors do, this is what we're trained for. We went on the attack. LSTs don't usually attack things. In this case, the LST went on the attack to save the ship, which was under heavy fire from Viet Cong along the riverbank. As we approached at the flank speed of 10 knots, the 40 millimeters, which are very useful cannon at short range, opened up on a number of Viet Cong positions, driving the Viet Cong back, ending the attack on the tanker. But a lot of damage had been done to this freighter. A lot of damage had been done to the freighter. And so the LST was able to close aboard. LSTs, despite their bathtub-like appearance, were at slow speeds, fairly maneuverable. Bring repair teams to the deck and unlimber the fire hoses and get sufficient water on the fire on this. That it took about an hour, but the flames were quenched. The cargo ship was saved. There were casualties aboard the cargo ship, but none aboard the LST. And the USS Kemper County charged into the fray and saved the day. So this is an unusual story and a very unusual clip for LST. I should mention, though, not everything went so smoothly. In the worst attack on any Navy ship in the whole Vietnam War, the USS Westchester County was mined. Was attacked by underwater swimmers on November 1st, 1968. The Westchester was full of ammunition. The bombs were placed critically to try to attack that ammunition. Fortunately, they weren't quite critically placed because while they did enormous damage, the Westchester did not completely blow up and take 5 or 6 ships with it. Nonetheless, this was a horrible attack on this LST. About a quarter of the people aboard were killed, many others wounded. 17 sailors, crewmen were killed, along with 2 visiting sailors, 2 South Vietnamese sailors that were aboard, 5 9th Infantry soldiers, a total of 26 people killed in this one attack. There were many other attacks on LSTs. At least 13 other LSTs were hit. There were over 44 men killed while serving on LSTs. And so this wasn't just a routine supply run. It could be a very dangerous supply run indeed. And so, Jim, you have a story about a guy that wasn't even shooting at anybody and something happened. Sentry duty itself could be really dangerous.
Now this is called He Died Defending His Ship, Hot, Dangerous Nights. At anchor anywhere in the Delta was dangerous. At night, as we've said, the enemy would send sappers from upstream swimming down among the anchor ships to attempt to attach mines to ships' anchor chains or hulls. At times, one could be excited, nervous, and afraid. One just figured out what to do on each watch. Fishing a grenade out of a box with sweaty hands, pulling the pin and getting it over the side into the water near the ship in the pitch black was hard. As with popping flares so they did not hit you or your ship. Almost happened to me once. So here a sailor dies, and this is from the handwritten deck log of the USS Benoit in November 1970, November 11th, on the mid-watch at vicinity of An Long on the 4 to 8 watch. Anchored as before at 0446. Concussion grenade exploded in Mount 41. 4 minutes later. Mustered all topside watches. Absentees, Hollis, John Edward, B784217, Seaman, USN. Commenced search of base area waters for Seaman Hollis. 8 minutes later. Mustered the crew, absentees, Hollis, John Edward, B784217, Seaman, USN. Presumed lost off the side. 2 minutes later, PCF swift boats underway to assist in the search. At 6:30, they secured from the nighttime conditions set daytime conditions. And at 7:30, an hour later, they concluded the search for Seaman Hollis results negative. Signed by T.R. Kirby, Lieutenant Junior Grade, USNR. 3 days later, at vicinity of An Long, on the mid-watch, they were anchored at Song Tien Gang. On the morning watch, 8 to 12, anchored as before, 11:56, just a little before noon. NSAD, SADEC message, 14:10:55 Zulu, November 70. Received words stating body of Hollis, John E., B784217, USN, has been recovered near Sadek, Republic of Vietnam. Signed, C.S. Manise, Lieutenant Junior Grade, USNR. That's the end of the official record for Seaman Hollis. But he's one of so many thousand remembered. He was remembered in his local newspaper about that time, the Lufkin, Texas Daily News. East Texan's body found. Services for Seaman John Edward Hollis, 24, of Apple Springs are pending at the Oakley Metcalf Funeral Home. Seaman Hollis was killed on November 11th, 1970, while on patrol aboard the SS Benawa along the Mekong River, Republic of South Vietnam. Memorial services were held earlier. He was a graduate of Apple Springs High School and had attended Stephen F. Austin State University and Sam Houston State University. But from my point of view, but for his draft number, he may have been a young man with a lot of promise. Seaman Hollis is remembered on the Vietnam Memorial. And you can look him up, and there's a thing called the virtual wall where people leave notes. And I'll read one of the notes left by one of his shipmates. A lot more that's in the official deck log entry. 26 March 2003. I remember your memorial service, John. I remember how you saved another sailor's life when he made a grave mistake that night. I remember you being my final hero of that war. John, I remember you always. From a shipmate, Daniel William DeWalt, Midlothian, Illinois. One can never know what exactly happened to Watchstander Hollis. One night 50 years ago in a place far away from his East Texas home. He died not at the hand of the enemy, but in defending his ship against that enemy. John?
The work was relentless. It went on during the day, it went on during the night. A frequent mission was just to supply naval gunfire support. You can see the tracer rounds from an LST hitting a target ashore. Sentry duty, transport duty, supply duty, gunfire support. It was relentless. And the upshot was that these ships were wearing out fast. The material condition, never good to begin with because many of them saw very severe service in World War II and Korea, just continued to deteriorate. And that it culminated in a problem that Chief Engineer Jim Giles encountered, and we're going to end with this story in a transit in the South China Sea, leading to the question: can you sail an LST? Jim, what in the world is all this about?
A little more lighthearted. I joined LST 902 in June 1969 as chief engineer. The ship was in terrible condition with many mission-limiting casualties, what we call CASREPs. In August 1969, we sailed for Yokosuka, Japan for much-needed repairs. The 902's last significant industrial maintenance was in Sasebo in mid-1967. That work was to repair damage the ship received while aiding a grounded merchantman at Triton Island in June of 1967. As we left Vietnam on a 2,000-mile trip to Japan, we had many engineering problems. The starboard main engine had a cracked block. so we had to use damage control shoring to keep the coolant from spraying out. The port main engine had a loose flywheel, which we could not fix on board. 2 of the 3 generators were inoperative, as well as the emergency generator. Even the general announcing system, the 1MC, was inoperative at times. The messenger of the watch would roam throughout the ship, informing us of matters like general quarters. As we were steaming north to Japan in the Strait of Luzon, both main engines failed at the same time. I got the dreaded message, chief engineer to the bridge. As I entered the pilot house, the CO, David Jardine, Lieutenant Jardine, demanded to know what the problem was. This was a rhetorical question, since before we left, he asked me if I thought we could make it to Japan. I said we had no choice. If we didn't get there, the ship would eventually sink. We even had a CAS-repped hull. I explained that my engineers were working on the engines to get them going again, but it's going to take a while. He was also a chief engineer on the Taussig. He demanded to know what I was going to do in the meantime. Well, I quipped, maybe we should try to sail the ship. The CO looked at me sternly and said, make it so. Fortunately, Lieutenant J.G. Dick Wilkins, the operations officer, was also on the bridge as the OOD. He wisely interjected something like, well, that's a good idea. With that, he said, with that said, the situation went very quickly from tense to relief to a sense of anticipation as we realized we could in fact do something to help ourselves. I told the CO that in addition to working on the engines, I would get to work on sails right away. I'd grown up in Massachusetts and learned to sail on Buzzards Bay, and Dick, I think, was also a sailor. All deckhands went to work quickly rigging the awning and spare hatch covers as sails. We used the forward gun tub, the crane boom, the ship's signal mast, and an improvised pole on the deck as our mast. Lieutenant Bill Griffiths, the supply officer, came up with 2 sets of small boat sails from his storerooms. Previously, those same storerooms never seemed to have any of the spare parts I ever needed. We eventually, for 3 days, we made an average of 3/4 of a knot, which was enough to maintain steerage weight. Meanwhile, my engineers and I were working steadily to jury rig the engines to get at least one of them going. We got the engine with a loose flywheel going, but we could only make about 1/3 power. At higher RPMs, the engine seemed to want to shake itself off its mountings. We eventually reached Yokosuka. There, the fleet maintenance officer and his staff met with the ship's officers in the wardroom. After reviewing our work package, he said, "You men are in the worst squadron in the Navy, and this ship is the worst ship in that squadron. Given the material condition of this United States Navy ship, I should courts-martial every one of you." Gulp. However, he could see that none of us had been on board long enough to do that much damage to this ship or any other ship. He concluded with his short visit with, "We'll fix you up." As they left, a swarm of Japanese artisans from every conceivable shop at the ship repair facility descended upon the ship. In 3 weeks, they removed every engine, pump, motor, and anything else that had parts from the ship. They overhauled and reinstalled everything. They even welded up most of the problems with the hull. They had to replace all our World War II Kapok life rafts after ours sank when the SRF float tested them in the Officers Club swimming pool. When we left Japan, everything worked. And in 3 short weeks, those SRF people made the ship like new. The crew could then be proud of the ship and return to Vietnam to provide service with dedication. And as we finished with a sunset picture, red at night, sailor's delight, red in the morning, sailor's warning. So we have a beautiful sunset. Back to you, John.
So thank you, Jim. You never knew what the next day would bring when you're riding those rough ships called LSTs. And I'm glad we were able to bring you this presentation today. I want to leave you with one final little story because you can't make this stuff up. And so much of this is just so unusual. In 1975, as South Vietnam was collapsing, a young boy was rescued by, of course, LST, the USS Barber County. That young man eventually made his way to the United States. A stellar scholar, he learned English. He was appointed to the Naval Academy. And in 2009, several years later, after he was picked up in the South China Sea, he is the commanding officer of the USS Lassen, a DLG that becomes one of the first ships to re-enter Vietnam as we reinvigorate a relationship that's totally different from the one we had with the war. Who could invent that? Nobody can make that up. LSTs are no more. We operate amphibious warfare differently today. But Jim and I were delighted that we were able to bring this story to you. Jim, we ready for some questions?
Certainly. I also want to thank everybody for the opportunity to present some more stories that John and I have tossed back and forth over half a century. There is one working LST that's at the LST Memorial at LST 325. You can look it up, and if you ever get a chance to go there, it's worth looking at.
John, could you elaborate on what physical security for the LSTs was in Vietnam? Nature of the sentry duty?
Yeah. What happened was that, LST's armament was largely anti-aircraft oriented from World War II, consisting of 40 millimeter cannons, some 20 millimeter on some ships, 50 caliber machine guns, and on some of the newer LSTs, 3-inch 50 guns. All of these were employed as effectively against land targets as they could be against air targets. The biggest danger was enemy swimmers. And it was a danger well known, especially after there were a couple of attacks. Like when I was a command duty officer, I was relentless, as I think Jim was, about making sure anything coming close to the ship that was suspicious was shot up. We had grenades thrown into the water on random occasions, but they were very frequent occasions. Concussion grenades that were designed to stun an enemy swimmer and keep them from planting a bomb on the ship. So we employed our small arms, M16s, and some older weapons that we had on board from World War II. M1 carbines, for instance, were a handy little thing. To shoot up stuff close to the ship. We'd warn people off. Sometimes we put a popper boat, a LCVP, out on a run, so you sort of circle the boat and drop grenades. We employed a lot of measures on sentry duty. It was always just, there's that tension there because there was always the possibility of attack, and in the back of your mind, especially after the Westchester County was hit, you knew what could happen.
I got a question from Jane. Question from Jane.
I can't see that.
What was your experience with PAL 3 Combat Helo Squadron that has been subject to several naval history articles, Sea Wolves?
I didn't have any direct experience with the Sea Wolves. That was one of the functions, one of the many missions that the LSTs entertained, and they supported the Sea Wolves during the entire period of their operation. Jim, do you ever encounter Sea Wolves?
Well, only in a strange way, in that we were motoring along, and a helicopter came up low on the water behind us on our port side, and with this rotor disc, in fact, below the main deck. And as we came to an area across the river on our starboard side, the helicopter popped up and let go its ordnance and then took off. And so I had no way of communicating with the helicopter. I had no idea what frequency they were on, but so that was my encounter with the armed helicopter.
Anyone else? We done? Okay, well, thank you all very much.